Hello and welcome to Monster of the Week, the only show on the internet filmed live on location from the bottom of the sea. Today we're taking a literal deep dive down to the ocean floor to uncover yet another species of giant that was forgotten and left behind in past editions of Dungeons & Dragons. We're gonna go over everything there is to know about these easygoing ocean dwellers, including their lore and ecology, as well as some plot hooks and story ideas for how you might use them in a D&D campaign. Then as always, we'll convert them from 2nd edition AD&D into 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons so you can bust them out at all your 5e Island adventures. I don't think it's any secret that I'm a big fan of giants, and the Reef giants have quickly become one of my favorites. They have a really fun backstory, a ton of plot hook potential, and can fulfill the role of just about any NPC that you want to fit them into. But before we get all wrapped up in giant lore, I want to give a massive shout out to this week's sponsor, The Seeker's Guide to Enchanting Emporiums. The Seeker's Guide to Enchanting Emporiums is a brand new 250-page 5th edition compatible supplement all about spending that money. Gone are the days of piling up mountains of gold with nothing to spend it on. This vibrantly illustrated anthology contains over 15 unique magic item shops and wandering merchants designed to be a perfect fit in your campaign. Each shop is filled with life and wonder, guaranteed to make your next fantasy shopping trip an adventure, literally. See, these shops are designed to be so much more than just a place to spend your gold. Each one is built from the ground up to be a full-on adventure location, if that's what you want it to be. Every locale is populated by a host of proprietors, staff, and even other customers, each with their own backstory and a wealth of role-playing prompts for the Dungeon Master. And of course, there are a ton of new magic items in this book to stock the shelves. So if that all sounds as exciting to you as it does to me, definitely check out the link in the pinned comment and the description down below and investigate the Kickstarter for yourself. So once again, thank you so much to the Seeker's Guide to Enchanting Emporiums for bringing us here to talk about this giant topic. So hopefully you've got a cool drink in your hand, preferably one garnished with some kind of fruit, because it's time to take a tropical vacation to the Sea of Stars and see exactly what this week's monster is up to. Reef giants first appeared in the monstrous compendium Qadim Appendix for 2nd edition Dungeons & Dragons. As the title would suggest, this book was filled with monsters from the Qadim campaign setting. Among them, a few new giants would appear, such as the desert giant, the jungle giant, and today's monster, the reef giant. The very first bit of text we see about this creature goes on to explain that they are the loners of giant kind, and that they live in well-appointed mansions which appear to be mere huts from the outside. So naturally, I needed to know more, but I'm getting way ahead of myself, so let's dial it back a little bit and start from the beginning. Reef giants are massive, one might even say giant, humanoid creatures. They have bronze skin, stark white hair, and subtle but visible fins around their neck or ears. In terms of clothing, they adorn themselves in relatively simple garments made from animal skins. However, in the water, they're usually buck-ass naked, aside from a tool belt for carrying supplies. Now, the second and final time these giants would ever appear is in the 2nd edition Monstrous Manual. Their stats here are totally unchanged, but they did at least put a speedo on our boy, so that's nice. Now overall, reef giants tend to be pretty self-sufficient. They are scavengers by nature who survive by fishing and foraging the coral reef where they make their home for anything they can eat. As you can imagine, there is a ton of variety in the food enjoyed by a reef giant, given the biodiversity of their home environment, so each giant is bound to have a long list of likes and dislikes when it comes to what they eat. They can net entire schools of fish in one fell swoop, and due to their massive strength, a reef giant can swim for hours at a time before tiring. This is great for them because on any given day, they're not just hunting for food, but also for treasure. Pearls, sponges, corals, and any other sunken booty all rank among the items a reef giant is after whenever it dives into the ocean for the day. Now, a lot of this stuff may not be exceptionally useful to the giant itself, But if it can manage to bring a massive deep sea haul to the market of a nearby city, there is potential to earn a heap of gold. And with that gold, the giant is able to find access to all sorts of stuff it doesn't normally have access to. Metal goods, herd animals, and construction materials are usually at the top of the list for a reef giant, but who knows what they might spend all that gold on. Maybe they just get really into collecting Gundams or something. Now, a lot of the time, the giant doesn't even have to do the trading themselves, but rather they set up an agreement with a merchant's guild where they simply trade goods for goods, cutting out the gold altogether. Something also mentioned, which is just a tiny little detail, but a detail I love, is that reef giants are particularly fond of sweets. They just really enjoy baked goods like pies or cakes and candies. So often, sweets are one of the things they take extra time to try and barter for if given the chance. But their taste in food is not the only thing decadent about the reef giant, though we'll circle back to that in a second. They are amphibious creatures, of course, so they can choose to live under the sea, on a small island, or in most cases, a combination of both. And while you may expect them to live in a simple dwelling, maybe even just sleeping under the stars, you'd be wrong. I mean, unless you were paying attention to the thing I said earlier about them living in mansion homes, because these giants live in straight up luxury. When establishing their new home, every reef giant takes on the task of constructing a home that would make even the most affluent hosts on MTV Cribs blush. Whether they choose to build underwater or on land, or some combination of the two, every reef giant home is not only massive, even by giant standards, but also constructed with the utmost ideals of comfort in mind. The outside is always concealed well to appear merely as part of the surrounding landscape in order to throw off looters or, gods forbid, adventurers, but inside, it's a whole different story. Their mansion is always stocked with furniture, art, oddities, and decor, all collected by the reef giant over a tremendously long life of treasure hunting. So while the reef giant may turn a great profit at the market with the things it finds, it always keeps the best stuff for itself. To the reef giant, every trinket, no matter how big or small, tells a story of a great day scouring the sea floor for baubles. All of this to say, every reef giant home is bound to be impressive, at least for the few creatures that ever see it. Because as I mentioned, reef giants are loners. Once they reach the age of maturity, they venture out into the ocean to do their own thing, sometimes for the entirety of their 600-year lifespan. However, there is always the possibility, either through intention or coincidence, that two reef giants meet and fall in love. When a pair of reef giants decides to mate, they do so for life, living together in a tropical paradise of their own making. Should they ever have children, those children will of course stay with their parents until it's time for them to venture out and find a home of their own, with one exception. In reef giant tradition, it is often the eldest daughter of any giant family who finds themselves in a somewhat unique position. Rather than leave her giant's mansion after high school, she instead remains behind to care for her parents as they age. After all, eventually age catches up with all of us, even giants, and they're not going to be out there hunting for treasure at 590 years old. So they rely on their eldest daughter to do that for them, which might seem like kind of a bum deal at first, but this labor is not without its reward. Once her parents pass on to the next life, the eldest daughter inherits everything that belonged to both her parents, including the mansion she was raised in. This is obviously a tremendous amount of wealth, but if she happens to be the eldest daughter of another one-time eldest daughter, you can see how this starts to add up. Because of this, there are a select few reef giants out there who have mansions and hordes of wealth that date back multiple generations and potentially thousands of years. So a reef giant with all this wealth and privilege finds herself with the world at her fingertips and hundreds of years to enjoy it. But as word spreads among the reef giants that the eldest daughter of a wealthy family has just become the official mistress of the mansion, something really interesting happens. Predictably, dozens of suitors from the surrounding area will immediately begin vying for the attention of the most eligible bachelorette on the sea floor, and what this bachelorette decides to do is entirely up to her. Because while the reef giants do have this established cultural norm of the eldest daughter being the one to look after her parents, and then being the inheritor of all their wealth, there's no tradition or really any protocol stating that she has to get married. In some cases, she may be completely uninterested in finding a partner, or maybe even already have a love interest, in which case the issue is pretty well resolved. However, some reef giants, of course, see this as an opportunity. After all, they've basically just become the most desirable individual among their species for miles around, so they can pick and choose who they will even entertain as a possible match, which is where the competition truly begins.
I picked Ken Griffey Jr.
In game show-esque fashion, any suitors who wish to put their name forward will do their utmost to not only prove themselves to the mistress, but also to undermine their competition. What ensues is a grand drama involving competitive fishing, diving, surfing, and anything else the lady of the house might put forward as an opportunity for a suitor to test their mettle. The exact nature of this competition and to what degree success is weighed in favor or against specific parties obviously depends on the individual reef giant mistress in question. But the fact that all of this is just common practice in reef giant society is not only hilarious to me, but also a situation rife with plot hooks. But we'll get to that in due time. For now, let's take a break from reef giant courtship rituals and talk about what kind of abilities these guys actually have. For as long as there have been giants in D&D, there have been some staples that apply to all of them. For the most part, they're big and they hit like a truck, and our reef giant is no exception. Clocking in at CR 10, the reef giant sits comfortably between cloud and storm giants in terms of established power levels. And in terms of stats, they're set up the way that you'd expect most giants to be set up. They have an absurdly high strength score and great constitution, along with a solid wisdom and charisma to boot. Due to the fact that they spend so much time in the deepest parts of the ocean, they are also straight up immune to cold damage, and they have dark vision. They've also got a swim speed of 60 feet and the amphibious trait. I feel like those are both things you would assume, but it's worth mentioning. As far as weapons, the reef giant makes use of a classic weapon combo you don't often see in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, that being the net and trident. Using their multi-attack, they can make an attack with their net, which, if it hits, restrains the creature they're attacking, and then they can make 2 trident attacks. This is especially brutal because if that net attack connects, not only will you have to spend your next turn trying to break out of the net, but the 2 follow-up trident strikes will have advantage on the attack roll, which is a little scary. It also has a rock attack, of course, for when it just needs to crush someone with a boulder. It's a pretty simple but effective way to just kill someone with a rock from far away. But the reef giant's truly lethal move is something called Whirlpool. Not that kind of whirlpool. This kind of whirlpool. This move can only be used by the giant when it's in a body of water, such as, I don't know, the ocean. Any creatures within 60 feet of it are dragged 15 feet closer and take 4d6 bludgeoning damage. Then, they have to make a strength saving throw. However, if you fail the save by 5 or more, not only do you take the full amount of damage, but you also start to drown. Once you run out of air, assuming you need to breathe, you can remain conscious for a number of rounds equal to your Constitution modifier. That means if you have a 14 con, you get 2 rounds before dropping to 0 hit points. You do always get at least 1 round to act here, so in the event that your con is a negative number or a 0, you will still have those precious 6 seconds to do something. Also, stop building characters with negative constitution modifiers. You know who you are. But if we get to the point where drowning in a whirlpool and being stabbed repeatedly by a trident doesn't stop the reef giant's enemy, it also has a few spells up its sleeves. I guess it doesn't have sleeves. They're mostly just Speedo, bikini kind of guys, but it's got magic. At will, they can do things like create or destroy water, shape water, water breathing, and water walk. Not incredibly useful in combat, but I suppose water breathing could be used to save a drowning ally. 3 times per day, it's got Fog Cloud, Misty Step, and Wall of Water, all of which are potentially very useful in combat, if not somewhat circumstantial. And once per day, it can cast Control Weather, which may not be a combat spell, but if the giant knows it's going to be engaging in battle, if it has time to kind of set up the environment in a way that suits it, that's always nice. All in all, a really solid stat block with a few circumstantial combat tricks that is bound to keep the enemy on their toes. I feel like this is fairly obvious, but the Reef Giant does thrive in battle when it can get itself and its opponent in the water. Its use of a trident as well is not just a flavorful thing. Tridents are one of the few weapons that don't suffer any penalties when used in underwater combat, so it makes sense. While not always realistic, if a Reef Giant does find itself in a fight, its number one priority should always be trying to get everyone submerged, because that's where this creature goes from dangerous to deadly. But at the end of the day, I think this creature's biggest strength and where it truly shines is in its plot hook potential. So let's move on from talking about combat and mechanics and explore a few. So there are tons of ways you can use a Reef Giant to tell a story. I love how diverse this creature is because you can truly make it as dire or as comedic as you want it to be. First and foremost, I really like the idea of a Reef Giant running an oddities shop in a port town. Maybe the giant themselves aren't even running the storefront, but they have a human friend who does the wheeling and dealing, and the giant brings in daily hauls of new goods to stock the shelves. That could fit into your story in lots of different ways, but at the very least, having an interesting shop in town where players can go and talk to the owner and spend their gold is always going to be a win with the folks at a table. Now, I apologize in advance for this next one, but the dad in my soul won't let me not say it, so I propose you have a Reef Giant running a dive bar. Get it? Like a dive bar. But seriously, puns aside, having a Reef Giant just low-key running a drinking establishment in an air bubble under the sea for sentient creatures down there would be great. Speaking of which, there are a lot of creatures who don't love Reef Giants, specifically merfolk and tritons. They often view the Reef Giant's plundering of the ocean as either an infringement on their territory or just bad for the environment, so they tend to dislike or actively hate Reef Giants. But that can be a great point of contention for the Dungeon Master. The players might be hired by some Tritons to go take out a Reef Giant only to find themselves working through its mansion like some kind of mini dungeon. Or maybe they just stumble upon the mansion of a Reef Giant who died alone some time ago, and since then all manner of less friendly sea creatures have taken up residence in the manse. Only by finding the giant's bones and performing a proper funeral can they put the soul to rest and maybe loot a few items on the way out. Speaking of which, maybe the actual adventure is the players trying to attain some kind of item that is in a Reef Giant's mansion. Say you had a ship crossing the ocean carrying all manner of treasure, and among the goods was a specific magic item of tremendous power. Unfortunately, that ship was lost at sea, believed to have gone down in a Kraken attack. While that sucks for everyone on board, for the Reef Giant, a shipwreck is a potential jackpot find. Not knowing what it was, maybe the Reef Giant took this object of immense power and simply hung it up like a decoration in his mansion. Now, after much detective work, the party has tracked it down and has to either convince the Reef Giant to part with it or plan a heist. I don't know about you, but an underwater mansion heist stealing from a giant sounds like an awesome adventure. There is also another facet of Reef Giant culture that we haven't really talked about yet, and that is their penchant for sailing. They know the sea extremely well and can make incredible sailors if they can find a ship large enough to accommodate them. But a Reef Giant sailing the high seas either as captain or even just a member of the crew could make for a really fun NPC to play, no matter the role they end up in. Maybe they're even a traveling merchant sailing the seas with all their rare finds on a ship barely big enough to contain them and their hoard, but if you happen to spot them and pull up with a boat of your own, you might have a chance to buy some cool stuff. Now, another thing I want to talk about, and something I think is worth considering for those of us in a more high fantasy Forgotten Realms style campaign, is where the Reef Giant fits in with the concept of the Ordning. I bring this up in literally every giant video I do because, in my opinion, it's a very important thing to consider. For those unaware, crash course, the Ordning is a system of organization that giants use to determine who's in charge. It's basically a caste system with hill giants at the bottom and storm giants at the top, which also coincides with the power level of each giant respectively. In the Qadim setting, the Ordning isn't really a thing, or at least it's not mentioned in their source material, so we're just kind of left to invent our own lore there. Personally, I love the idea that they were supposed to fit somewhere between cloud giants and storm giants since it's reflective of their power, but being loners, they just dipped from the ordning entirely, deciding they wanted nothing to do with the other giants and their politics. Not only does that seem fitting to me, but I also think it's yet another opportunity for controversy that a DM can twist into a plot hook of some kind. Since storm giants do sometimes live in the depths of the sea, perhaps there is a conflict between a storm giant and a reef giant, which the party gets embroiled in. Lastly, I want to talk about the thing that made me decide to do a video about this creature in the first place. And that is the fact that you can just run a reef giant encounter like it's an episode of The Bachelorette.
I feel like you're here to make out with a bunch of dudes on TV.
Maybe the party gets intermingled in a reef giant courtship ritual, where a bunch of giants are all vying for the hand of a newly eligible bachelorette with a ton of money. There are a lot of different ways you could tackle this. Maybe the party is working with the mistress to help her narrow down the selection by spying on all the other giants or even testing them in some way with the promise of a reward if they help her find a suitable mate. Or perhaps the party is friends with a reef giant who is requesting that the party help them in these courtship games. Maybe he needs a dope magic surfboard to help him win the surfing competition and offers to pay the party if they can find it. But when they do find it, it turns out that it's been cursed by another one of the reef giants trying to sabotage their boy, so they have to bring the magic surfboard to a temple to get it cleansed and then run it back to the beach just in time for the contest. There are a lot of things you could do here, but just having a reef giant courtship contest as the backdrop of any kind of small adventure honestly sounds like a really lighthearted and fun opportunity for a game. But however you choose to use this monster, if you do want to use it, as always, linked in the description down below is a Google document which contains all the stats, lore, and information about this creature that you will need to successfully run it at your 5th edition game table. And of course, if you're one of my lovely patrons over on the Dungeon Dad Patreon page, you can find the Dungeon Dad Patreon style stat block, which contains all the same information, just presented in a nicely formatted high-res PDF with the new updated artwork done this week by the lovely Tam. So massive shout out to all you patrons out there watching for helping me do what I do here. I literally couldn't do it without you. And a tremendous shout out goes out to our randomly selected Patron of the Week. This week's randomly selected patron is Evil Chan. Thank you so much for your support no matter which side of the alignment spectrum you wind up on. And thank you for watching. If you like what I'm doing here and you want to see more content like this, please leave a like, leave a comment, consider subscribing to the channel. All that stuff is free and helps me out tremendously. And of course, if there's a monster from an older version of D&D or some other tabletop game such as Pathfinder, Numenera, whatever, let me know in the comments down below what creature you'd like to see. And who knows, you might see it show up on an episode of Monster of the Week. If you want to get extra involved with the Dungeon Dad community, you can find a link to our Discord in the description down there as well, where we have a monster suggestions channel and all kinds of other channels with all kinds of cool stuff such as homebrew monster contests, chatting about D&D, posting memes, Discord, and of course the link to my Patreon's down there as well, so if you're not already subscribed to me on Patreon and you feel like throwing some financial support my way, I definitely encourage you to at least check it out. It's $3 a month. If you got the $3 to spare, helps me keep all my hot lights turned on. Anyways, enough plugging myself and all my socials and all of that. I hope you enjoyed this video. It was super fun to talk about, and I just love these guys. I want to write a campaign all around reef giants because I think they're just neat. But anyways, that's all I got for you this week. As always, stick around to the last like 10 seconds or whatever it is for a preview of what's coming next week. It's gonna be a weird one, and I'll see you then. Bye for now.
Is this even a real creature? You're serious? All right. Perhaps the most useless monster to ever grace the pages of a D&D book appears. An egg-shaped mass with tentacles for hair. But wait, there seems to be some hidden secret behind its eyes. Next episode, Wingless Wonder. Tune in next time for lots more fan service.